What if one of the most important economic stories in Africa is not about gold, oil, or another $1 billion loan, but about a farmer trying to get more value from what he already grows? In Burkina Faso, that question is becoming much bigger than agriculture. A farmer can produce onions, tomatoes, mangoes, sesame, or grain, but production alone does not create prosperity. Crops must be stored, processed, transported, sold, and connected to markets that can pay more. And thousands of miles away, in the Gulf, sits one of the world's most connected commercial hubs, the United Arab Emirates. In May 2025, UAE envoy Sheikh Shakbut bin Nahyan Al Nahyan met President Ibrahim Traore in Ouagadougou, where both sides discussed stronger economic cooperation. Later, Burkina Faso and the UAE continued investment discussions in Abu Dhabi. That matters because this may be about far more than diplomatic courtesy. It may be about Burkina Faso widening its economic map. If you believe Africa's future should be shaped by what Africans can build, not only by what they can extract, tell me where you are watching from. Because here is the question that could define this entire relationship. What if Burkina Faso stops looking at the UAE mainly as a destination for gold and starts seeing it as a gateway for agriculture, processing, energy, logistics, and new markets? That possibility does not guarantee success. It does something more important. It creates options. And for a landlocked nation trying to become more economically self-reliant, options can become power. By the end of this story, we will examine 3 doors this relationship could open: farming, processing, and trade corridors. But the third door may be the one that changes everything, because Burkina Faso may not simply be searching for another buyer. It may be searching for another road to the world. Burkina Faso's real economic battle is not simply about producing more. It is about keeping more of the value created by what its people produce. That distinction matters because many African economies have spent decades exporting raw materials, raw crops, and unfinished commodities while importing finished goods at far higher prices. For a Burkinabe farmer, the problem becomes painfully simple. Imagine a family harvesting onions, mangoes, sesame, tomatoes, or grain after months of work. The harvest may be good, the weather may cooperate, the fields may produce more than expected, but if there is not enough storage, if roads are unreliable, if processing is limited, or if buyers are too far away, part of that success can lose value before it ever reaches a market. That is why agriculture cannot be measured only by how much food comes out of the ground. It must also be measured by what happens after the harvest. Can it be stored? Can it be processed? Can it be packaged? Can it reach cities, neighboring countries, and eventually higher value international markets? This is where Burkina Faso's economic strategy becomes more interesting. Ibrahim Traore has repeatedly placed national production, local capacity, and greater economic independence near the center of his political message. But slogans alone do not transform an economy. The harder task is building the chain that connects a farmer to a factory to a transport corridor, and that corridor to a paying market. Think of it as a ladder. First, Burkina Faso grows. then it stores, then it processes, then it transports, then it exports. And finally, if the system becomes strong enough, it begins to build recognizable products and brands of its own. Each step potentially keeps more income, skills, and employment inside the country. That is the deeper reason the UAE relationship deserves attention. Burkina Faso's trade with the Emirates has been heavily linked to precious metals, especially gold. Gold matters. It generates export value and foreign exchange. But gold cannot become the entire story of a nation with millions of people who need jobs, food security, stronger local businesses, and a more diversified economy. A country can possess valuable minerals and still struggle to create broad prosperity if too little value is added at home. The challenge for Burkina Faso is therefore not to abandon gold. It is to make sure gold does not define the ceiling of its ambition. Agriculture offers a different kind of opportunity because it touches far more people directly. It connects rural families, transport workers, mechanics, warehouse operators, processors, traders, engineers, and eventually exporters. A stronger agricultural economy can become an employment system, not just a food system. And that is where the emotional meaning of this transformation becomes powerful. A farmer does not need a speech about sovereignty if the price at the farm gate remains weak. A young worker does not need a slogan about independence if there is no factory, warehouse, or logistics company offering a path forward. Real economic sovereignty becomes visible when ordinary people can earn more from what their country produces. Every nation eventually faces the same question. Do you simply sell what lies beneath your feet, or do you build more value from what your people can create above them? Burkina Faso is now confronting that question in real time. If stronger trade ties with the UAE remain centered on raw commodities, the relationship may stay useful but limited. If those ties begin connecting agriculture, processing, energy, logistics, and market access, the impact could become much larger because the most important shift would not be from one foreign partner to another. It would be from extraction toward production, from production toward processing, and from processing toward bargaining power. And that raises the next question. What happens if Burkina Faso stops seeing the Gulf mainly as a destination for gold and starts seeing it as a gateway for everything it could build around the harvest? The opportunity with the UAE becomes more important when we stop thinking about trade as a ship leaving a port and start thinking about the entire chain that must exist before that ship ever moves. Burkina Faso and the United Arab Emirates have already discussed deep economic and commercial cooperation, and agriculture has appeared among the sectors identified for bilateral engagement. But what matters now is not a giant agricultural agreement has already been signed. It has not. What matters is understanding what could happen if Burkina Faso uses this relationship to connect production with processing, energy, logistics, and access to higher value markets. Start with the farm. Burkina Faso can increase production, expand cultivated land, improve irrigation, and push for stronger food security. But higher output creates a second challenge almost immediately. More tomatoes mean little if they spoil before reaching a buyer. More mangoes mean less if there is no reliable cold storage. More grain means limited progress if it leaves the country with almost no processing added. This is why the next stage may matter even more than the harvest itself. Processing is where agriculture begins to become industry. Imagine a young Burkinabe worker standing inside a modest processing plant instead of leaving home because local opportunities are too narrow. His job might be cleaning sesame, packaging dried mango, operating refrigeration equipment, checking quality standards, repairing machinery, or preparing goods for export. That worker may never own a farm, yet the agricultural economy can still create a future for him. This is the larger transformation Burkina Faso must pursue if it wants agriculture to become a source of national power rather than only survival. Grow more, yes, but also clean more, package more, preserve more, transform more, and sell more under terms that keep value inside Burkina Faso. Do not only export the harvest, export the work added to the harvest. That is where the UAE becomes strategically interesting. The Gulf is not simply a wealthy destination. It is part of a commercial environment shaped by imported food demand, logistics networks, investment capital, aviation links, ports, warehousing, and access to markets far beyond the Emirates themselves. For Burkina Faso, a stronger relationship with the UAE could therefore become useful in several different ways. It could help attract commercial attention toward agricultural products. It could encourage investment in storage or processing. It could support energy systems needed by industrial agriculture. And perhaps most importantly, it could expose Burkinabe producers to the standards required to compete in demanding international markets. None of that is automatic. Each step would require contracts, infrastructure, financing, quality control, reliable transport, and political discipline. But that is exactly why this story is more serious than a simple announcement about friendship between two governments. The real test is whether diplomacy can be converted into productive capacity. A handshake in Ouagadougou has symbolic value. A functioning warehouse has economic value. A ministerial meeting can open a door, a processing line can keep that door open, and a reliable export relationship can turn that opening into bargaining power. If you had to choose one priority for Burkina Faso's next decade, what would matter most, producing more, processing more, or reaching new markets? The answer may reveal how you see sovereignty itself, because a nation can grow crops and still remain dependent. It can export raw goods and still remain vulnerable. It becomes stronger when more stages of the value chain remain under its own control. That is why the phrase agricultural revolution should not be reduced to tractors, fields, or harvest records. The real revolution begins when the farmer is connected to storage. The is connected to processing. This processing plant is connected to transport, and transport is connected to a market that rewards quality and consistency. For Burkina Faso, the UAE could become part of that chain. But there is a deeper obstacle waiting just beyond the farm gate. Burkina Faso has no coastline. Every serious export strategy must move through someone else's territory before reaching a major port. And that means the next chapter is not only about Burkina Faso and the UAE, it is about whether a landlocked Sahel nation can turn regional geography from a weakness into an advantage. Because if Burkina Faso wants a trade revolution, it may need its neighbors to rise with it. Burkina Faso's biggest trade weakness is visible on any map. It has no coastline. Every serious export strategy must cross another country before reaching a major seaport, and that means geography can either become a trap or a source of leverage. If Burkina Faso expands agricultural production, develops more processing capacity, and begins targeting Gulf markets, trucks, rail links, warehouses, border crossings, customs systems, and neighboring economies suddenly become part of the same story. This is where the idea of a Burkina Faso UAE partnership could become larger than two countries, not because a regional agricultural corridor has already been announced. It has not. But because any successful trade expansion from a landlocked Sahel economy would naturally depend on regional cooperation. Imagine a Burkinabe producer who has done everything right. The crop is harvested, the product is cleaned, it is packaged to a higher standard. A buyer is interested, yet the shipment still has hundreds of kilometers to travel before it reaches a port connected to global markets. One delay at a border can reduce profit. 1 week road can raise transport costs. One unreliable storage point can damage quality. That is why the next phase of economic sovereignty cannot be national alone. It must also be regional. If Burkina Faso proves that new external partnerships can create real value at home, neighboring governments will be watching closely. They will ask whether this model creates jobs, whether it strengthens local businesses, whether infrastructure improves, and whether African states gain more negotiating power instead of simply changing the destination of raw exports. Mali and Niger would have obvious reasons to study such a model because they face many of the same structural challenges of landlocked trade, long transport routes, and the need for stronger regional connectivity. Other West African states would watch for a different reason. Corridors create business. Trucks need fuel, warehouses need workers, border towns need services, processing centers need electricity, ports need volume. A successful Burkina Faso export strategy could therefore create incentives far beyond the original farm or factory. And this is where the African perspective becomes important. For decades, the continent has often been discussed as a collection of separate national markets. But farmers, truck drivers, traders, and young entrepreneurs do not experience economics in neat political boxes. They experience distances, prices, border delays, access to finance, and whether a product can actually reach a customer. If Burkina Faso becomes better at connecting its producers to Gulf demand, African businesses along those routes could respond faster than governments do. A transport company may add vehicles, a warehouse operator may expand capacity, a trader may begin sourcing from new districts. A young mechanic may find work because more trucks are moving through town. These changes are not guaranteed, but they show why trade can become more than a number on a government report. It can become a network of livelihoods. And if you want to measure whether Burkina Faso is truly rising, watch that network. Do not look only at the value of exports. Watch whether ordinary people gain more ways to participate in them. This also changes the meaning of independence. Economic sovereignty does not require Burkina Faso to close itself off from the UAE, Europe, China, the United States, or anyone else. Isolation is not sovereignty. Sovereignty is having enough productive strength, enough partners, and enough alternatives that no single external relationship can determine your future. Independence is not refusing to trade. Independence is having the power to negotiate how you trade. That may be one of the most important ideas behind Burkina Faso's current search for new economic relationships. The more markets it can reach, the more options it may gain. The more value it adds at home, the stronger those options become. And if that logic spreads across the Sahel, the region could slowly shift from being seen mainly as a zone of crisis toward becoming a zone where new trade routes, production systems, and economic alliances are tested. But there is a danger hidden inside that hopeful picture. Africa has opened many new doors before, only to discover that the contract changed while the old pattern remained. Raw materials still left. Foreign firms still captured most of the value. Local industries remained weak, so the real question is not whether the UAE becomes a bigger partner. The real question is whether Burkina Faso becomes a stronger partner, because changing the flag on the other side of the table means very little if the terms of the table never change. There is a temptation in stories like this to treat every new partnership as a victory. That would be a mistake. Burkina Faso does not become economically sovereign simply because it trades with a different foreign partner. The deeper question is whether the structure of the relationship changes. Who owns the processing facilities? Who controls the warehouses, the financing, and the logistics? Where are profits retained? Are Burkinabe workers being trained for higher value jobs or only for the lowest paid stages of production? Are local companies being strengthened or pushed aside? These questions matter because Africa has seen this pattern before. A country finds a new investor, a new agreement is announced, the flags change, the speeches change, but raw materials still leave the country while the most valuable stages of production remain somewhere else. If that happens, geography changes, but the economic model does not. That is the risk Burkina Faso must avoid. A stronger relationship with the UAE could be useful precisely because it gives Ouagadougou another option. But options only become power when leaders use them to negotiate better terms. That means asking for more than purchases. It means asking whether investment can strengthen storage, processing, energy, transport, standards, financing, and local skills. It means asking whether a Burkinabe farmer gains more bargaining power at the farm gate. It means asking whether a young technician can learn to maintain the machines instead of waiting for foreign specialists every time something breaks. And it means asking whether more of the value created by Burkina Faso's land and labor stays inside Burkina Faso. This is where Ibrahim Traore faces one of the hardest tests of his economic message. Political independence can be declared. Productive independence has to be built. It takes time, contracts, engineers, roads, power, discipline, and institutions that can survive beyond one administration. The UAE cannot provide that entire transformation, and Burkina Faso should not expect it to. But a carefully structured partnership could become one piece of a broader strategy to diversify markets and reduce dependence on any single external power. That is what makes the Gulf pivot geopolitically interesting. Washington, Brussels, Beijing, and other capitals may watch these relationships through the language of influence. African governments are more likely to judge them through the language of leverage. Can a country work with the Gulf, China, Europe, the United States, and regional partners without becoming economically trapped by any one of them? Can it use competition among partners to improve its own negotiating position? If this is a chessboard, the strongest player may not be the one with the biggest piece. It may be the one with the most possible moves. And that is why Burkina Faso's strategy matters beyond symbolism. A new embassy meeting means little if local production remains weak. A new investor means little if domestic companies never grow. A new market means little if farmers remain price takers at the bottom of the chain. The real measure of success will be visible far from conference rooms. It will be visible in warehouses, processing lines, transport depots, village markets, and household incomes. Because in the end, this entire story returned to the same question we started with, that diplomacy changed the life of the person who produced the harvest. If the answer becomes yes, Burkina Faso may be doing more than changing partners. It may be changing its position in the economic system. And that is where the final question begins. Can a country once defined mainly by insecurity become known instead for production trade, the power to choose its own economic direction? Burkina Faso's future will not be decided by one meeting in Ouagadougou, one investment forum in Abu Dhabi, or one new foreign partnership. It will be decided by what happens after the cameras leave. Can more food be produced? Can more crops be stored instead of lost? Can more products be processed before they cross a border? Can more young Burkinabe find skilled work inside the value chain their own country is building? Those are the questions that will determine whether this economic opening becomes a turning point or simply another diplomatic chapter. The UAE relationship does not guarantee transformation, but it gives Burkina Faso something valuable, another option. And options matter when a country is trying to reduce dependence, diversify trade, and negotiate from a stronger position. If Burkina Faso can connect farms to storage, storage to factories, factories to regional corridors, and those corridors to Gulf markets, the result could be much larger than a rise in exports. It could begin changing how the country sees itself. Not only as a producer of gold, not only as a landlocked state in a troubled region, but as a country capable of turning soil, labor, strategy, and partnerships into greater national strength. That is the real test facing Ibrahim Traore. His economic legacy will not be measured only by the number of agreements signed under his government. It will be measured by whether Burkina Faso becomes more capable because of them, more capable of feeding itself, more capable of processing what it grows, more capable of training its own workers, more capable of reaching new markets, and more capable of saying no when the terms of a deal do not serve the national interest. If that happens, the meaning of sovereignty begins to change. It is no longer only political language. It becomes visible in a warehouse that keeps a harvest from spoiling, in a factory that creates skilled employment, in a truck carrying a Burkinabe product toward a new market, and in a farmer receiving more value for months of work. And if that model begins to work, other African countries will notice. They will ask whether they too can widen their partnerships without surrendering control. They will ask whether trade can become a path toward greater independence instead of another form of dependence. So tell me what you think. Is the UAE opening a serious new economic door for Burkina Faso, or should Ibrahim Traore move more cautiously before expanding this Gulf partnership? Write your view below. And if you believe Africa's strongest future will come from producing more, processing more, and negotiating from greater strength, share this story with someone watching the continent's economic rise. Because the next chapter of African sovereignty may not be written in a speech. It may be grown in a field, built inside a factory, and carried across a border. And if Burkina Faso proves that model can work, which African nation will be next?